Hey folks, did you know that detergent pods are also wrapped in plastic? Yep, that film around those pods are plastic and they end up in our oceans, our rivers, and our soils. And, it's on all your dishes.
In our bodies.
Yeah.
Sorry, I don't mean to discredit it with the crazy guy's voice. In our bodies.
Yeah. Blue Land is on a mission to eliminate single-use plastic by reinventing cleaning essentials to be better for you and the planet with the same powerful clean you're used to. Blue Land uses no single-use plastic in any component from bottles, tablets, and wrappers to shipping. Their tablet packaging is fully compostable, and Blue Land products are effective and affordable. Their dishwasher tablets are proven to perform on baked-on, burnt-out stains. No rinse aid is needed, and you can feel good about what's washing the dishes that you use. You can get even more savings by buying refills in bulk or setting up a subscription. The subscriptions are customizable and convenient, so you never run out of your most used products. Blue Land is trusted in over 1 million homes, including mine, including this office. We use it all over the office. I also use it for my dishes and my dishwasher at home. It comes in a really cute little blue tin. You can save that tin. You can use it for other things. I don't know what, but it's cute. That's all. Blue Land has a special offer for listeners right now. Get 15% off your first order by going to blueland.com/majority. You won't want to miss this. Blueland.com/majority for 15% off. That's blueland.com/majority to get 15% off. And now, time for the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, November 7th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Daniel Nichanian of Bolts Magazine will be back with us to talk about the extant House races, as well as election results on the state level. And later in the show, Usamah Andrabi of Justice Democrats joins us to talk about the path forward for the Democratic Party. Also on the program, Harris concedes the election to Trump and manages not to incite a riot at the Capitol. So the blame game begins. Longtime Democratic strategists go on record to say it's Biden's fault for seeking re-election, despite his unpopularity and age, which I 100% agree with. Exit polling shows a majority of white women, even with abortion on the ballot, voted for Trump. Again. And abortion measures outperformed Harris in almost every state, meaning those women voted to protect abortion where they live, but not nationally. Bob Casey has a glimmer of hope as the Pennsylvania count continues. And luckily, it looks like Jackie Rosen will hold on in Nevada, as well as Baldwin in Wisconsin. But the race for the House is still unclear. Republicans have an edge, but Hakeem Jeffries says there's still a glimmer of hope. This is important because without the House, Trump has unchecked power, basically. Netanyahu sucks up to Trump on social media, gleeful that his preferred candidate won.
Israel's preferred candidate.
Yep.
In general.
Oh, the
by
whole
landslide.
population. Redder, when you poll them, redder than the reddest state in the country, basically. Liberal democracy, I was told. I don't know. Trump begins vetting his cabinet. Mike Pompeo may return as Secretary of State. That's a name floated. His team reiterates their intention to mass deport millions right after his inauguration and drill, baby, drill. The Justice Department begins winding down its criminal cases against Trump in anticipation of him taking office. And that November 26th sentencing date in the hush money case, in which he was convicted, is being scrapped. Trump is expected to roll back Biden's more aggressive antitrust enforcement, meaning Lena Khan is likely gone. It's so funny because J.D. Vance was saying how much he likes her. And the child tax credit, for that matter, which he didn't show up to vote for. And lastly, stay safe, California. Wildfires are moving dangerously fast in Southern California today. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It's an EmMajority Report Thursday. Hello. Hello. Yesterday was a very difficult show. We're going to try to strike a tone today that's about moving forward, even though I think it's a different reaction to 2016 because I think people were surprised and shocked and angered. And this time it's more just resignation and depression about where we truly are.
I am a little bit in a different place, whereas I think this is the pattern that people pointed to after 2016 and were ignored. The amount of people who said, Tara Raghavir, who is of KC Tenants, tweeted out retweeted herself from 2022 saying, hey, if addressing inflation isn't enough if you don't do something about, say, rent prices and things like that. And instead we just decided to run a status quo presidency. And I don't know. It's time to kick a lot of these bums out that ran this campaign.
Yep. It's there will be a lot of autopsies done about what happened in this race. I think the primary narrative that we're seeing is the economy. A lot of elite media folks told people that the economy was doing amazing. And for people trading on Wall Street, it's there were the traditional capitalist measures of how the economy was doing did indicate that the economy was doing well. But for people who have to pay rent, for people who have to pay groceries, they were furious at the administration. And can you pop up this graph here? This is really instructive because once basically the Republicans took back the House and the COVID recovery was abandoned by the administration, you see this drop off here. Build Back Better being the central vision of the platform to start from 2020 into the beginning of 2022. And then, of course, Manchin and Sinema torpedoed much of it. But once again, the more austerity politics took hold, and Biden tried to fashion himself as a modern LBJ by also supporting a disastrous foreign policy, bloody endeavor, and bloating the Pentagon budget, both for Ukraine, but also to support Israel. Things turned, and the child tax credit expired.
Inflation concern, and they decided, Biden, again, this chat is in emphases. He goes from emphasizing Build Back Better to national debt and deficit reduction. And how do we reduce that deficit, so-called? It was by not pursuing, say, or locking in the expanded child tax credit that have child poverty. So guess what happened to child poverty when it expired? It doubled.
It doubled. And then we were told all the time about how good the economy is doing. And that's going to be, I think, the main story. And it's part of the anti-incumbency backlash that you're seeing globally. And it's a failure of liberalism. And Harris took over an incumbent campaign, was shoehorned into it because Biden dropped out at the 11th hour. And she ran with his consultants. Who knows if she had actually run in a legitimate primary and there had been other candidates, like if Biden had done what he promised, that he would be a bridge candidate, what could have happened? There could have been a primary where people even knew who she was. I mean, you would be shocked. There are millions of Americans that have no idea who Kamala Harris is. And
the ones who do, can they say what she was actually running for
Right.
besides not being Trump?
And so she was extremely disadvantaged in that way. And in the primary, she still would have been the favorite, right? But she would have had to develop a vision outside of continuing the Biden administration, which was unpopular. And that was the biggest problem, it appears, thus far in this race. You know, and I will reiterate this. It's not something I think people love to hear, but I just feel it in my bones. Like, there was misogyny at play here as well. I don't know how we can say that the Trump campaign that was cheering on calling her a C word with their super PAC ads, and Trump laughing in the final days about how Kamala worked on a corner, to discount the role that misogyny played here, especially when she had higher favorables than someone like Hillary Clinton, you begin to see a bit of a through line. And it could have been different if Biden was more popular, right? In the way that AMLO is with Claudia Sheinbaum in Mexico. Him leaving with a 60% approval rating and having a more popular agenda and handing it off to a woman as a successor, that advantaged her in that situation. Kamala was carrying the baggage of a really unpopular administration, and I think that opened a lot of the door for this misogyny. And what concerns me is definitely also what you see with men 18 to 29, who seem to be really buying into this. And we've been sounding the alarm about this on this program for a while. The manosphere, the edgelord stuff, and this is an entirely different media and communications environment that the Democrats need to reckon with here. You know, as I said, her turnout her door knocking operation, she went to all the swing states, which Hillary did, blanketed them. Her turnout, her ground game by every traditional metric was way superior to his. And it didn't matter because Trump was going on podcasts and he appealed and turned out those mid to low propensity voters. And the suburbs did not turn out for Kamala Harris. So the strategy just was completely wrong. And at the end of the day, let's play this clip from Stead. I always forget his last name. Herndon. He is a New York Times reporter, and he has been covering this race by going around the country and actually talking to people. This was his assessment, and I just thought it was exactly right.
The biggest character in this race, to me, was not on the ballot in 2020. It was Joe Biden, in my opinion. Like, Joe Biden's refusal to do what he implied he would do in 2020 and transition to a different type of generation, allow Democrats to have a broader conversation about change, allow Democrats to be freed from the status quo, is not what happened. I think it would be easier for me to say that Donald Trump completed this mass realignment among the working class if we had a universe where the Democrats had a primary, where the Democrats nominated a candidate that was based around some set of ideas, and it was not tied to this administration so clearly and the status quo. But since that is not what happened, I think it has made the Republican ability to be the agents of change so much easier that I find it the biggest thing that has happened in this race. And I think speaks to what we're saying about what's happened over the last 3 months. The place that they were in before the candidate switch happened made it such that you could run a perfect race or whatever. And you are still playing on ground that brings you to 50-50. Because the biggest thing, in my opinion, that happened was they tied themselves to an unpopular administration, and with it, the status quo.
That did not represent change.
And there was a lot of evidence that that was a bad idea.
So when we talk about the moments, the hinge points, and again, I don't know what could have changed. I agree with his analysis. Her not distancing herself from Biden on a number of issues is going to be discussed. But was it even possible in 100-ish days as the VP to do that? I don't know. But what I do know is that Biden here walked us with his hubris into a second Trump administration. Let's read some of these quotes from Democrats in Politico raging at Biden. He shouldn't have run, said Jim Manley, a top aide to former Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. This is no time to pull punches or be concerned about anyone's feelings. He and his staff have done an enormous amount of damage to this country. According to interviews with nearly a dozen officials and party operatives, Biden squandered valuable months only to end in disaster on the debate stage. And by the time he decided to pass the torch, he had saddled Harris with too many challenges and far too little time to build a winning case for herself. The fresh anger at Biden came as Democrats devolved into a round of recriminations following Tuesday's decisive loss to Donald Trump, with officials struggling to explain why a majority of the electorate voted Republican for the first time in 20 years. Democratic leaders had hoped Harris could separate herself from Biden's deficiencies after taking over the nomination with just 107 days to the election. The candidate switch in July generated a fresh surge of enthusiasm with voters and appeared to instantly reset the race, bolstering the theory that she could eke out a win against an opponent as divisive as Trump. But any gains made during her abridged campaign were swamped on Tuesday by the enduring backlash against the Biden administration over inflation and cost of living concerns, and a president who proved incapable of selling the electorate on his accomplishments, and whose apparent overconfidence kept him in the campaign despite growing signs that he wasn't up for the job. She ran an extraordinary campaign with a very tough hand that was handed to her. Mark Longabaugh, a Democratic strategist and former advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders, said of Harris, "The truth of the matter is Biden should have stepped aside earlier and let the party put together a longer game plan." I mean, hey, Bernie was trying to get him to stay in, so that's an older advisor of Bernie Sanders's. I disagreed with what Bernie was doing then. But the die, as it appears, it probably was already cast by that point. Now, let's play another clip of Ested, who went on Ested Herndon, who went on Christiane Amanpour's show. I guess this is a guest host. And he was asked about the abortion issue in particular. As I mentioned, abortion measures did fairly well across the country, but that did not translate to the federal level or to creating the urgency for these white women, who a majority of them voted for Trump again. A person who has been found liable for sexual abuse, accused of sexual assault and rape dozens of times. This is what Herndon says he observed on the campaign trail as it relates to the issue of abortion.
We're literally on the ballot in multiple states. This was supposed to be the issue that galvanized so many people on the left. Did that pan out?
Well, I think we can definitely say that reproductive rights was not prioritized above other issues. And I don't think it's really a question of the left. What we see is that reproductive rights was meant to try to cut through, I think, particularly in the suburbs, so particularly give people a permission structure to vote for Harris, and then try to cast Donald Trump and Republicans largely as extreme. But one of the things that was true throughout kind of our travels is that people understood that Donald Trump had a different position on abortion rights than the rest of the party. And they would cite that often as a reason why they could support some abortion rights. And they did not think Donald Trump was like an existential threat to that freedom and still support him at the top of the ticket. And I think we saw some of that yesterday. I don't think it's if that the special elections that we saw from Democrats over the past 2 years were false or some mirage or something, but that the composition of people who vote in the presidential election are just prioritizing that top of the ballot over everything else. And frankly, the Democratic argument that abortion rights would outdo the economy, would overcome inflation, would overcome people's concerns about immigration, that clearly did not pan out to be true. And so I think it's going to be interesting where both parties kind of go next here, too, because Donald Trump may have kind of flirted with a different abortion position than the rest of the party, but his ecosystem is still very anti-abortion in the way that's pretty outside of the median voter in the country. So I think both sides kind of an open question what to do going forward. But Democrats thought it was a kind of secret electoral sauce that it didn't turn out to be.
Well, let's talk.
It didn't turn out that way.
It's a massive crime that they depended on it to be that. And they squandered what should have been a headwind to get people out to the polls, to get further progress on other issues. And they used it to say, oh, maybe we have more leeway to support Israel because our base is going to turn out for this stuff anyway. Like, this is a conscious failure. When they say they expect it to be a secret sauce, that is criminal malpractice. And they blew rights for people.
They did. And they also, I mean, with the people not believing that Trump was extreme on abortion. This is what Matt's saying though. Like we couldn't rely on that because if that's what people still think, like you can't make an argument that Harrison Walls didn't message the abortion issue. You can't. Like they focused on it a lot. That wasn't the problem. Like
people aren't tuning in like that.
Trump is, for everything about his unfavorability, for his crudeness, for his criminality, for all of this, still people think he's less extreme on this issue than the Republicans. This is not a mandate for the Republican vision. This is an indictment on the Democrats. And we're going to have a lot of conversations about the future. And it's not one factor. But the lack of recognition as to what the economy really meant for people on a day-to-day basis, I think, is the driving narrative at this particular point. And, you know, you can say, like, yes, Biden was the most pro-labor president in decades, but he was unable to communicate. And the Democrats didn't communicate that. And this is what happens. So you can't just be like, well, look at the numbers. Look at all of this. Look at how Biden, you know, supported X and the UAW or whatever. If it's not penetrating, then it doesn't matter.
And if, I'm sorry, like the actual numbers are that, okay, we had a little bit of wage growth and some policy that counteracts, like we've had since 2008, just a collapse of, I mean, the middle class that Democrats campaign for so much. Like it's not going to take it's going to take more than a little bit of wage growth for a certain sector of the economy while everything else is going up too. And the insanity that something like the child tax credit could expire and we're still telling people that the economy is fine. Look at the unemployment numbers, look at GDP growth relative to the G7. That just tells me that those people don't actually know somebody who like experiences poverty. And that's the problem. Well,
yeah. I mean, if I see one more liberal account scolding people for not having their opinion of what the economy looks like, I'm going to scream. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, I mean,
then don't be in politics if you're not in the persuasion business. Like, I feel despondent about the misogyny element of it. I really do, and I will see like how I feel in a week. But still, like that could have been overcome if the circumstances were a little bit different. I don't think it could have been overcome in 107 days. If we look at this now, Biden had to have dropped out earlier so we could have had a primary process where these really important issues for people on a day-to-day basis could have been articulated. And that could have brought attention to the party as a contrast to Donald Trump blowing microphones and calling Kamala a cunt. So, like, that, you know,
we needed the credibility of, like, they blow credibility when they say the economy's good, and then you wonder why people aren't getting the full message, and people still turned out, like, on the abortion question on ballot lines for it, right? And it's just they don't trust Democrats. That's the problem here. There's a drag there. And like Tara Ragavir, one final point of Casey Tenets, there's the economy according to suits with elite degrees, and there's the economy according to working people who can't afford their rent or groceries. The first group calls the shots but fundamentally lacks knowledge or curiosity about the second group.
At the end of the day, it's most likely, when we look back on this, that escaping the shadow of Biden's unpopularity was quite difficult. And she was also unwilling to do that because of a very conservative, small c strategy. Although there was the entire thing was also appeals to Republicans, and none of that panned out in the suburbs. There needs to be a reimagination of how the Democrats run these national campaigns, but we said that after 2016. And
well, Bernie has the sauce, and they've suppressed it. I mean, I agree with Crystal Ball on this. Like all these groups that we're worried about that are leaving the Democrats now, working class groups, Bernie, like Latinos, Bernie was turning them out, and they suppressed him twice, called him sexist ahead of the Iowa primaries 2 straight times.
Yeah. And so, and that was Obama also, those kinds of politics. So we, to be clear-eyed going forward, we have to extricate that vision from the party.
We know the model.
We know the model, and now it's time to get to work. All right, folks. A word from our sponsors, and then we'll be talking to Daniel Nichanian. Have you thought about a gift for yourself this year? You could use it.
A couple times.
One that has the power to help you grow, learn, become a better version of yourself. Well, give yourself the gift of language by getting Babbel. I am already planning to get myself this gift in anticipation of maybe doing some travel to Europe. I'm hoping to do that next year. Want to be able to walk around and not sound like a dummy and be able to communicate. Babbel is the way to go. Speak like a whole new you with Babbel, the language learning app that gets you talking. With quick 10-minute lessons handcrafted by over 200 language experts, Babbel gets you talking a new language in 3 weeks. And because talking is key to really knowing a language, Babbel is designed for real conversation. Wasting hundreds on private tutors is the old way of learning languages. Babbel's tips and tools are inspired by real-life stuff you'll actually need when talking. With a focus on conversation, you'll be ready to talk wherever you go. And you want more proof that Babbel gets you talking? Studies from Yale, Michigan State University, and other leading universities continue to prove Babbel works. One study found that using Babbel for 15 hours is equivalent to a full semester at college. With over 16 million subscriptions sold, Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by a 20-day money-back guarantee, so your gift to yourself or your loved ones is risk-free. This holiday season, give the gift of language with Babbel, and here is a special holiday deal for our listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for our listeners at babbel.com/majority. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/majority, spelled BABBEL.com/majority. Rules and restrictions may apply. We'll put a link to that wherever you're listening to or watching this. And lastly, when you think about businesses that they're selling through the roof, think of Aloe or Allbirds or Skims. Hey, I have products from all of those. Well, probably because they're on Shopify. And that made it so easy for me to purchase from those brands. When you think about those products, it could be a cool brand or brilliant marketing, but an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. It's what we use here at the Majority Report, folks. Nobody does selling better than Shopify, home of the #1 checkout on the planet, and the not-so-secret with Shop Pay that boosts conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going. So if you're into growing your business, your commerce platform, better be ready to sell whatever your customers are scrolling or strolling, or wherever I should say, on the web, in your store, in their feed, and everywhere in between. Businesses that sell more sell on Shopify. Again, the Majority Report uses Shopify. We love it. It makes it super easy because we're not the most business-oriented podcast, so we need a little bit of help, and Shopify provides that. Upgrade your...
I got a meeting with the CFO later.
Yeah. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/majority. All lowercase. Go to shopify.com/majority to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/majority. All right, folks, we'll be right back, and then we'll be talking to Daniel Nichanian. We are back, and we are joined once again by a friend of the show, Daniel Nichanian of Bolts Magazine. Daniel, thanks so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me.
Bad. We just elected probably someone with a lot of fascist tendencies as for president. Your thoughts, Daniel?
It's been a long few days. I mean, what I'm really been trying to wrap my head around, and maybe some of what we talk about is sort of obviously it was a great night for Republicans beyond the presidency, right? But if you had just shown me on Tuesday in the day the map of the presidential election and the number and like the margins and the shifts, I think I would have just had a very different prediction for what's happening at the local level, at the state level, at the congressional level as well. Again, not to overstate the fact that Republicans didn't have big wins, at all levels, but we've all seen the map with the red shift in the presidential race, and that again is not entirely translating at the local, state, federal level. And just I think that's something I've been trying to think about the last 24 hours, both to understand the result and see the result, and then try and start thinking about what happened. I think a lot of people have a lot of opinions formed very quickly yesterday. And I just think we're still trying to understand what happened across the elections and then try and understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's gonna not be one factor that we look at here. The one through line that seems clear is just the Biden administration's unpopularity sticking to Harris, and there being basically a pretty broad anti-Democrat, anti-Republican, what was I going to say? Anti-incumbent, that's what I meant to say. Sentiment. And that's, I guess, the one consistent narrative that everyone seems to agree on at this point.
Yeah, I mean, there was an article this morning, I would credit, but at the moment I'm blanking, where saying that every election in the world this year has had the incumbent party suffer a defeat. One of the last times that I was on this show was to talk about the French elections a few months ago, which I was also very closely following, which saw a major fall by the incumbent party, sort of in a weird situation, because the incumbent party brought the elections upon itself, since the president there didn't have to call them. But maybe if he had seen what was going to happen in the U.S. a few months later, he would have made a different decision.
Yeah, maybe. And perhaps the lesson from that was that anti-incumbency backlash versus what we thought the silver lining could have been at the time was the left and the center coming together to beat back fascism. And that also was my theory about the strategy of Harris and this campaign, which proved to be wildly insufficient, and the Republicans made massive gains on the federal level.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, that the specific thing we talked about in July, which worked in France, didn't hear. I mean, I think maybe this is not the full conversation for today, but I think the history of anti-far right movements in France and who's been in that versus in the US is just so different. Like who even identifies as part of a political family that has stood up to the far right historically. In France, for instance, it's just so different. It does include elements of this center right from a long time ago. They're just a very different history here, even if there were efforts, obviously, right, to construct a coalition that had that message from the Harris campaign.
Right, exactly. And so I guess we'll just touch on the Senate briefly, and then we can talk about the House. The Democrats obviously did not retain the Senate. Sherrod Brown lost, which I did not anticipate. A wave of crypto money came in to back Bernie Moreno, who was an extreme MAGA Republican who the Democrats had great success running against in 2020 and 2022. So the theory was, okay, we can try this a third time, but the juice had run out, really. And then, obviously, Dan Osborne did not pull it off in Nebraska, nor did John Tester. It appears that Jackie Rosen is going to hang on in Nevada, and Tammy Baldwin has won in Wisconsin. Bob Casey looks like he's likely to lose, which would be another Republican flip. but there's still a question because there's a lot of ballots that are extant.
Yes, that's right. I think the main one, I think you didn't mention, the main Senate race you didn't mention was the save by Democrats in Michigan,
Yes.
another state that Trump obviously flipped from 2020, but where Democrats saved the Senate seat, and possibly Arizona, which hasn't been called yet, which seems like a mirror image of Pennsylvania right now, where you would rather be in the Democratic candidates' shoes there, but the call hasn't come yet from the AP, and we are waiting for more ballots. So that would put us at +3 Republicans right now, with Pennsylvania being possibly the fourth flip for Republicans. That's sort of what I meant though earlier, where I said if you had shown me just the presidential map, you could expect a lot worse for Democrats in the Senate. It's a very bad result for the Senate for Democrats if they lose 3 to 4 seats. That's bad for Democrats. But how do they also not look at Wisconsin, Nevada, and Michigan and realize that it could have been worse? Just as a reminder, in 2020, there was only one state that split its tickets between the Senate race and the presidential race. It was Maine, with Susan Collins' re-election. I believe right now that 2016 had no state like that. At most would have had one, but I believe it's 0. Right now, we're talking about 4 states splitting their tickets between Donald Trump and a Democratic candidate for Senate, if not 5. So that's really a major story as well right now.
Yes, exactly. Sorry, your mic just got a little softer.
That might be your headphones.
That might be these headphones are crappy. All right. Well, it sounds, I guess you sound good to everybody else, so apologies for that. But I'll just up the volume here. Yeah, no, the Democrats down ballot ended up overperforming the top of the ticket, which was the case also in 2022, where Democrats overperformed despite Biden's unpopularity, but still diminishing returns with someone in the administration at the top of the ticket now.
Well, there's only so much ticket splitting that could happen. I mean, it was the big story for anyone who was following the 2024 campaign. The polls were showing large amounts of ticket splitting between the presidential candidate and the Senate candidates, especially in the spring up to July, and still after there was a replacement, obviously, from Biden to Harris. We saw the gap really shrink in the blue wall states in the fall. It just enough. I mean, we're talking about very small margins in Michigan and Wisconsin. So that's interesting. We're also seeing some of that at the House level, and also in other elections.
And so the House, Hakeem Jeffries says there's still a slim chance that the Democrats retain the House, or there's a glimmer of hope. I don't know. It looks like 30% to 70% if we're being a little generous. What's your sense of how things are going? It appears like it's going to come down to some of these races in California potentially.
Yes, I think that's right, but not only California. At the moment, Republicans have the clear edge based on the available count to keep the House majority, probably roughly of the same size as they won in 2022. So a fairly small one. They didn't. Another example, again, the top of the ticket. The top of the ticket compared to the House results. Republicans Trump probably won more congressional districts than House Republican candidates did. But at the moment, it looks like Republicans have a lead in the current count in 223 districts. The majority is 2018. That was as of last night. I didn't check the updated counts this morning. But so that's the majority. And the big question remains in places there are still some districts that are uncalled around the country, like New York, Maryland comes to mind, Alaska, and other places. But there's a lot of districts in California specifically where late counts of ballots, there's a lot of mail ballots that are going to come in and could shift some of these seats there and possibly shrink the Republican majority. And if there's really a series of great counting developments for Democrats, give them a tiny majority, but we will see in the coming week.
Yeah. And I mean, the implications of Trump having the House and the Senate are enormous. I mean, you just talked about Trump overperforming a lot of these Republicans. I think it's going to be, people need to reckon with that Trump may be perceived as more moderate than Republicans because of his aesthetic and like for everything about him, his convictions, his uncouthness. That people kind of like the TV country likes their TV president.
I think the one thing I'm gonna look into, and maybe others have already done this analysis and I haven't seen it, but the degree to which Trump doing better than other Republicans is due to people at the same time voting Trump and Democrats, or whether it's due to people leaving the ballot blank after they voted for Trump, and not necessarily voting for Democrat or Republican down ballot, just skipping the congressional races. I think it's a mix of both. There's some early signs of undervoting in some of these states. That does it's obviously going to be a mix of both, but that's also a pattern that would fit what we saw in other elections, which is that some voters who showed up to vote for Trump in October, November, just didn't vote in 2022 or in other elections. I mean, I think that has just also the implications of what that means are different. I don't entirely know what to make of it at the moment. I don't have, but that seems like an interesting phenomenon, right? To the extent that it's happening.
Right. It's just we played earlier. Stead Herndon of the Times said that when he went around and talked to people about abortion, that folks did not think that Trump's position was as extreme as the rest of the Republicans, and that's anecdotal, but it's also in keeping with what the results show, which, you know, he's been normalized. He's been normalized because the opposition hasn't provided an alternative that I think makes sense for people or speaks to their concerns, which is the bread and butter kitchen table issues.
On abortion rights specifically, since you were mentioning that, I mean, one of the obvious stories on Tuesday is that, again, talking about possible contrast, Trump won, but in many states, including states that voted for Trump overwhelmingly, voters approved an abortion rights initiative, right? It did fail in Florida, a big loss for the abortion rights movement there, but it did get well above 50%. It needed a 60% threshold. And then a similar amendment to protect abortion access passed very strongly in Arizona, Missouri, and I believe also other red states. So those are states. I mean, that is, first of all, just on its face, huge implications for people who live in Arizona and Missouri, obviously, in the coming years in terms of overturning Republican bans on abortion in those states. So that in and of itself is important. But yeah, I mean, those initiatives existed because of Dobbs, which existed because of Trump, and Trump obviously had talked about. Had said it was one of his major accomplishments. I mean, it's a very old story, right? That on the same day, voters vote for a Republican presidential candidate and pass things like increasing the minimum wage, increasing taxes on the wealthy. This year, 3 red states passed paid sick leave for employees. Again, Alaska, Missouri, and I'm blanking on the third state at the moment, but we are seeing this disconnect. Obviously, that is not something that Republicans would do. That doesn't mean people don't know that. So I don't have an easy answer there. It's a very old story, and we're seeing it this year on abortion.
And I guess so. The state legislatures that were in play here. Can you give us an update on that? Obviously, Mark Robinson was handed a massive defeat in North Carolina, and the theory that I had that there was not enough split tickets to sustain a Harris loss there was wrong. She lost easily. It was pretty clear early in the night that she lost, but Democrats still did okay, is my understanding, in North Carolina. What were the results there?
Well, I would say that's probably the best state for Democrats down ballot in terms of things that went well for them. Because, well, first of all, the governor's race was, well, if we had had this conversation exactly two months ago, I would have said it was the most important race for governor in the country, the most uncertain, the tightest in the polls. And then scandals dropped about Robinson, the Republican nominee, and that just stopped being competitive. But just so, in the moment on Tuesday, didn't feel like a big result in the sense that we all expected it. But if we just go back to a few months ago, that's obviously is a very big result. It's a big state, a big hold for Democrats. What's also important is that Democrats broke the supermajority that Republicans had at the state in the state assembly, in the state house, which will prevent Republicans from overriding vetoes by the governor, as they've been doing over the last year on party line votes. So, for instance, a year ago, Republicans adopted abortion restrictions in North Carolina through overriding the veto of the governor. So that's just like obviously the most illustrative example of what the stakes of that assembly result are. Democrats also defended the attorney general race in North Carolina. They also this is going to sound very on the radar, but there was a race people were paying attention to for the office that leads education in North Carolina, because the Republican nominee was possibly the most far-right candidate on the ticket there. She had called for Barack Obama to be executed at some point on social media, and called schools indoctrination centers, and she lost as well to the Democratic nominee. So again, examples of ticket splitting in some places if you look down ballot.
Any other glimmers of hope that you'd like to add in terms of how the Democrats did? I guess what also where in state races, where did they lose
right.
as well?
I mean, my summary of the results to come across as a good night for Democrats. I think the result sort of is, it could have been worse at the local level for Democrats, but the small shifts were enough to cost them real influence. I think that the headline result at the state level is probably that Democrats have lost control of the government in Michigan. There was a huge gain for them in 2022, where they flipped the state Senate and the state House, as well as already having the governorship. They appear to have lost the state House last week, not by a lot, but they only had a one seat majority. So, it doesn't take a lot. Yeah.
Do you know where that was? I mean, obviously Gaza and
good question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure which. I'm not sure which seats flipped in Michigan. But it's an example of like the Democrats were only ahead by a seat, right? Like any shift red would have had huge influences on Michigan. The other state where Democrats, probably it's not been finalized yet, lost control of the government is Minnesota, where Governor Walz is going to go back to being, well, he was governor, but he's going to stay governor, and he's no longer probably going to have control of the state government, which Democrats, again, had only gained in 2022 and had done a lot with. It's still coming down to recounts. It's possible that the state House will end up tied. Democrats kept the state Senate. So again, it's like they were up a few seats. Now it might be tied. We're not talking about epochal shifts, but any shift is important. The chamber that I'm just surprised by right now is, maybe I'll end my answer with that, is the Pennsylvania House. So, I mean, anyone who's watching this knows that Pennsylvania was the swing state going into Tuesday. We just talked about how the Senate race there might be the main Senate race where Republicans managed to do both presidential and Senate, sweep both, as opposed to the other blue wall states. And yet, so Democrats had 102 to 101 majority on the state House that they won in 2022 under very different circumstances, because Shapiro and Fetterman got very easy victories in 2022. Fast forward to Tuesday. At the moment, Democrats are up in 102 seats. Republicans are up at 101 seats. Not a single district changed hands. That's what I mean by like I don't have any theory yet as to what's going on. But the shift from 2020 to 2024 at the top of the ticket combined with not a single state house district among 203 districts changing hands, is a striking result. It's not one I would have expected if you had just shown me the presidential and Senate races.
Yeah. And I mean, can you talk a bit briefly before we let you go? I know you have to run, Daniel, about the rightward shift in blue states like New Jersey and New York. Republicans gaining ground and Harris losing, like winning New Jersey by single digits is crazy.
Yeah, no, the Northeast was ground zero for Trump gains, never enough to make the state actually competitive. And in a way, like in New Hampshire, if the New Hampshire, I'm pretty sure if the New Hampshire shift had looked like some of the other states, New Hampshire could have tipped, but it didn't come that close to it. So it always has had this drop, but not at the level of like having a surprising, like a stunning result necessarily in terms of flipping a state. I mean, that is something we saw in 2022, where the Northeast especially saw big gains by Republicans that weren't necessarily seen in other states, including the swing states of this year, or out West. We don't know the margins at all yet in the West, because California, Oregon, Washington take a lot longer to count their mail ballots. So it's unclear at the moment whether what we'll see on the West Coast and whether there will be really a split there in terms of how the East Coast and West Coast voted. I mean, obviously that will have implications. It didn't. I also will say, again, sort of a broken record, Republicans didn't huge shifts at the presidential level. We also saw that in some statewide races, like the Senate race in New Jersey. Andy Kim held the seat for Democrats by more than Harris, but didn't blow it away at all. But at the House level, no upsets by Republicans, no huge shift we didn't see coming. In New York, the Democrats appear to have gained at least three seats in the U.S. House. So yeah, we're also seeing some of those patterns there, and we'll have another test of all that in a year, because the New Jersey governor's race is going to happen in New Jersey, and it'll be an open race where Democrats will try and keep control of the state government.
Well, Daniel, thanks so much for coming on. Everybody, check out Boltz Magazine for updates on this. Appreciate you always in your analysis.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks. All right, folks, quick break. And when we come back, we're going to be talking a little bit about the future of Justice Democrats, progressives getting elected in Congress. One moment, and we'll be right back. We are back, and we are joined now by Usamah Andrabi, Communications Director for Justice Democrats. Thanks so much for coming on the show today, Usamah.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Emma.
So, what next? I mean, you know, we're quite enraged by the AIPAC taking out of two of our best members of Congress, Jamal Bowman and Cori Bush, but this is a broader problem that the Democrats have to reckon with here, that clearly, nationally, there is a rejection of these politics. What is your view as we sit here, you know, less than 48 hours after we got these results?
Yeah, I mean, I think definitely what we've seen is there's a problem with the Democratic Party brand kind of writ large, and that working class people across the country, more than anyone across kind of racial lines, do not see the Democratic Party as a party that represents their interests anymore, when they did once, decades and decades ago. And that's a problem of the Democratic Party's own making. You know, we can point fingers at the right for doing what they have done and for galvanizing a base of people that used to be Democratic voters, but also our goal is to win these voters and to convince them that a better way is possible than fascism. And that starts by, frankly, putting a nail in the coffin of this Democratic Party and starting anew, because we have seen for decades and decades the same pundits, donors, consultants, and career politicians try and sell the same vision while being beholden to sort of the same corporations and billionaires that Republicans are, but trying to pretend like we're not. While Republicans are proud to be the party of corporate power and billionaires and right-wing fanaticism. And I think that's what we saw this cycle. And it looks like, building a new Democratic Party through the leadership of some of these new young generation of progressives that have actually stood up for working class values, that have been uncompromised, from Gaza to union power to Medicare for all and a Green New Deal. And you're seeing it in the same states that we need to win these elections. You have Summer Lee in Western Pennsylvania. You have Rashida Tlaib in Michigan, who are, Rashida's outperforming Kamala Harris and Donald Trump both in Dearborn. Summer Lee's winning clear victories against Republicans in Western PA, which we used to consider sort of a bellwether for so much of the country. There is a different way that is possible. And, to your first point, it is a devastating loss to lose a Jamal Bowman and a Cori Bush from this Congress. These are two of the most working class leaders in our Congress, and we are a less representative Congress because of it. But, a lesson we should learn and a sort of a hope we should feel from it, which Cori and Jamal have kind of said as well, is it just shows how powerful our movement and frankly how powerful everyday people can be. If it takes $15 to $30 million to take out a former nurse or middle school principal in the halls of power, that means that we can elect more nurses and principals and union workers and carpenters to the halls of power and take out these billionaires or benefactors of billionaires who've been in power for fucking decades, who have driven our party into the ground.
So, what is that path then, right? Because, your Justice Democrats has had success in ushering in the squad in 2018. And these were really progressive members in safe blue districts that ended up winning and pushing the conversation in a way that, is beneficial to the country. But we also saw that there can be a flood of money into a race like Cori Bush and Jamal Bowman that takes those folks out. I also observe that of, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, Summer Lee, all were members of their state government prior to becoming representatives. So it's almost like they had more institutional support, and Cori Bush was thrown to the wolves, and Jamal Bowman, the New York Democrats aren't doing crap to help him. So, is there a lesson that you can take from that? How does Justice Democrats approach kind of putting together a crop of new candidates in this environment?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true that, Cori and Jamal were two of the most working class members of Congress and did not hold elected office prior to coming to Congress. And so that comes with a whole different set of, newness to the politics of Congress, the bullshit of Congress, and the bullshit of the mechanisms that exist within our legislator. But, we should be looking to build a future that doesn't prevent those sorts of people from being in Congress, from being in halls of power. Just because Congress is kind of this political place doesn't mean that everyday people shouldn't be a part of it. And I think it's up to us, organizations like Justice Democrats, as well as the Democratic Party, to build the infrastructure to support those sort of people to actually be and stay in power. And to your point, the New York Democratic Party and the Democratic Party writ large, frankly, refuses to be that sort of party. And it's one of the many reasons why working class people across the country don't really see it as a party that reflects their interests or is fighting for them. And so, we should be, we are actively right now recruiting in districts across the country. And, you can go and nominate anyone in your community to challenge a member of Congress that you think should not be your representative anymore. And that's where it starts. And it starts by continuing to support those folks when we have these challenges. But, you also made the point that AIPAC spent $100 million this cycle in races across the country. Crypto spent hundreds of millions of dollars, is one of the biggest spenders in our elections now. These are the sort of existential threats to our democracy outside of Donald Trump's fascism that the Democratic Party refuses to sort of actually take seriously. And until we as a party take big money out of politics, take on APAC, take on crypto, we are not going to be this party of working class people. We are going to be the party that had a class realignment where we gained a bunch more voters over who make more than $100,000, and we lost a lot of voters who make less than $100,000. And they see that. They see these super PACs working, and they see Democrats as being the brand of that. And there needs to be a rebrand, that actually is real. And it starts from the bottom up. Like, this is not an electoral movement, right? We are an electoral organization, obviously, but it requires the power of grassroots movements, the power of unions, mobilizing workers and building this movement to eventually elect working class leaders in Congress that can represent the needs of working class people across the country.
Yeah, and that hollowing out, it's confusing to, I think, a lot of pundits. I will contend that I thought Harris was going to win by a lot, and I didn't think that about Hillary in 2016, and that was when I was out on the trail and back in my old gig going across Pennsylvania and Michigan and Wisconsin. So that's a blind spot perhaps on my end, but it is just shocking to me that, like, everything we've been told about politics, her ground game was superior. She raised a ton more money. She, like, all of the fundamentals, all of that speak. Oh, it was nothing. It was hot air. And to your point about money in politics, it didn't matter. Like, Trump didn't spend any money, and he just went on a bunch of bro podcasts, and he ended up eking out a victory. And it goes like, so what is all this for? What is all this kind of campaign speak and conventional wisdom about how you run a national campaign like this? We have to throw that out the window yesterday. But I mean, I thought that it could still carry the day. It's quite clear it can't. Yeah, absolutely. I think, like, this Democratic Party has been the same kind of version of itself for decades since the realignment post Nixon. And I think we have seen since Obama, we had historic elections, historic kind of new versions of how to run a presidential campaign that we have refused to kind of get rid of, or refused to think that it's no longer possible. It is not 2008 anymore. It is not 2012 anymore. We've already survived a Donald Trump presidency. We've survived a fucking pandemic, and we're living through multiple genocides. Like, it is not the same world we live in anymore, and we need to retire that old way of thinking. I saw Jim Messina on one of the networks talking about how, he was looking at Bucks County, and Kamala Harris had this massive operation in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, that was so crucial to Obama winning Pennsylvania, a much better operation than Donald Trump had, and yet she lost. And it's just not enough to be a Democrat who has all these volunteers who are giving the same message over and over again. And especially, it's not enough to be a party that is just defending against something rather than building towards something. Yep. And I think that's been our problem since Donald Trump came to the scene. We have used him as a boogeyman, as the right often creates their own boogeyman, be it immigrants, marginalized communities of any kind. We try and make him a boogeyman, which worked in 2020, but that was a particular moment. We were coming off a pandemic. We were coming off of a Black Lives Matter movement that drove a lot of the grassroots energy towards Joe Biden, really towards anyone that wasn't Donald Trump. But we don't have that luxury anymore. We are the incumbents. We built a sort of future, and we saw some movement towards building that collective vision at the start of President Biden's presidency: child tax credits, care economy, investments, canceling student debt, union work, etc. But then we also saw them beginning to stop doing that. Child tax credit expired. We didn't fight for canceling student debt. We started continuing to give out leases to big oil corporations and saw hurricanes destroy half the fucking Southeast. And so what do we do? Like, we cannot have a, left-wing presidency, then a right-wing presidency, and expect people to think that you are anything but hypocrites. And I think that's what Democrats are starting to see. We are so mad that everyday people don't see Republicans as hypocrites, while our party's leadership is doing the same thing over and over again, cozying up with billionaires and war criminals that are the same ones that have been dividing our communities for decades, and hoping that everyday people will come together on this
massive coalition that has no unifying thread outside of Donald Trump is bad. And we have to be a party like the folks like Summerlee, like Rashida, like Ilhan, who actually build a vision for how to improve the lives of everyone, no matter their race, class, gender, and lift all boats.
Yep. And so in terms of making sure that the Democratic Party learns this correct lesson, how do we do that? Because seeing a lot of takes on MSNBC that Kamala was too liberal, that seems to be, because that's what the polling says, right? This is what drives me crazy. The polling says she's too liberal. Okay. What that means is woman of color, California. That's it. So you can't change that. She didn't mention her gender or her race at all. She would be asked, and this was smart, but it wasn't enough, right? Because she'd be asked, and she'd say, "I'll be a president for all Americans." But she still, even with all of these appeals to Republicans, even with everything that the campaign did on that front, she was still perceived as too liberal with the exit polling, and she didn't make gains with Republicans at all. So what is the answer? Because I don't think that perception of her is immutable. Like, if there had been a more robust economic agenda to go along with it, that too liberal thing may have not made a difference.
Yeah, I think, possibly everything is hearsay, but I completely agree in that, like, the Democratic Party, every single time they try and tack right to win this mythical center that evidently is every single person in this country somehow, we don't win, because people who are convinced by right-wing policies do not want diet right-wing policies. And that's what we will always be unless we become the Republican Party. And so we need to stop trying to tack right and instead actually create an alternative. We should not just be a slightly different version in the center. We have to provide people a completely different vision for what is possible. On immigration, we have to provide people a different vision of why immigrants are crucial to our economy and why we should build a pathway to citizenship, which are very popular policies, right? Obviously, we have seen exit polls and polling that shows the right-wing policies on immigration are popular too. And that's because Republicans are putting in the effort to do that, to make it so that we scapegoat immigrant communities so that you don't pay attention while they're picking your pockets with tariffs and corporate tax cuts. And that is the work we have to do. And I saw fucking Tom Swazi tweet like 10 minutes ago that was just like, we need the problem is somehow, once again, defund the police. I'm like, swear to fucking God, like, when is the last time someone on a Democratic stage has said the words defund the police? Like, how many years can we keep writing on the left for losing elections we never lost because of that? And so what is so funny about people like Tom Swazi or all these other mods who are like, we need to get back to bread and butter, economic issues, everyday people issues. That has been the core base of policies on the left for decades. And the people who have obstructed them and stopped them are the Tom Swazis of the world.
But if that's Swazi's analysis, she did exactly what he would have wanted.
Exactly.
Like, she ran on economic issues. They were just like standard Democratic Party housing, like engage with the private sector. We'll build housing, and she did talk about the child tax credit, but not enough. Like, these were things that were broad consensus policies within the Democratic Party. So what is he even talking about? This is not on his terms. She did exactly what he wanted. Okay, and bread and butter issues aren't what the problem. The problem is the lack of vision for those issues and the lack of boldness and the lack of connection to a broader movement. I mean, she did everything that he wanted on those terms, and they're still saying that they find the same conclusion. It's maddening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, which is, moderates and the center right will always find a million people to blame outside of themselves who have always been the fucking problem in this party. We continue to allow Republican lights in the Democratic Party and call it a Big Ten and then wonder why we lose to Republican rights. So, it's the same old bullshit as always. And yeah, this is literally Tom Suozzi. I remember after he won his election, he was like, we need to go right on immigration. We need to do all these things. This is how I won this random seat. And it's like, okay, we did it. What happened? What was the outcome? This was the outcome. And, to your point, Kamala Harris had an economic plan, various different layouts. Sorry, my cat may come into the screen shortly if she makes it to this chair.
I would honestly love that.
But she, these economic plans, they lacked a vision. They lacked a simplicity that voters needed to hear about. Kate Arnoff had this great piece in the New Republic today about how, the economy was good. Industrialization happened. Manufacturing jobs did increase. All these things happened, but it doesn't change the lived reality for a lot of people on the ground. Increasing thousands of manufacturing jobs is not actually what the middle class across the country, the majority of the middle class, feel, despite the effects on our economy. And so it's about actually getting to everyday people on the ground and understanding how can we improve your lived reality right now, not just here's these grand scheme, very wonky policies that folks don't really necessarily understand. I'm not saying they're bad policies, but they are not palatable to folks as much as, Donald Trump and JD Vance going up there saying some bullshit that sounds like, okay, they're going off the cuff. And unfortunately, that's what people like about Donald Trump, is that it sounds like he is truly saying what he believes, and it sounds authentic, which obviously his authenticity is psychotic fascism. But they don't see that from a lot of voters. And much of this comes with their misogynoir against Kamala Harris that we can't dismiss as a part of that. But it's also this is not a Kamala Harris problem, frankly. This is a Democratic Party problem. This was a problem since Joe Biden, very much made the choice to no longer be a transitional presidency to a new generation of the Democratic Party. And we tied ourselves to a status quo rather than tying ourselves to a hopeful future, which is how Obama won.
Exactly. Right. That's it's a problem systemically with the party, and it is amazing how Trump has taken out these legacy establishment political dynasty families, from the Bushes with his humiliation of Jeb to the Cheneys and the way that Liz Cheney lost her seat because of Trump MAGA backlash, to the Obama legacy, which I include Joe Biden in. I'm not putting Biden in as the Bidens as a legacy family here. They're an outgrowth of Obama, and to the Clintons with his destruction of that legacy when he won in 2016. So the question is where do we go? And I guess that's where that will be my final question for you, Usamah, because there's no clear leader of the Democratic Party right now. None. And that's very scary to an extent. I had been hopeful that Walz and his kind of politics would have been in practice incorporated into a Harris administration. We'll never know. But who do we look to now besides the obvious progressive leaders in Congress?
And can I tag on to that? What did you think of Bernie's statement yesterday about the you abandon the working class, the working class abandons you?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, we put out a very similar statement after the election. So I agree with Bernie's sentiments, right? It is, and I saw Jamie Harrison quote tweet Bernie's sentiments, it's frankly laughable to have the person who's leading the Democratic Party's deep failure say that this is an incorrect assessment when it's very clearly the correct assessment. We have abandoned the working class by cozying up to corporations and billionaires as an institution of the Democratic Party. And the working class people can see that because Republicans are telling them so. And it doesn't matter if Republicans are doing the same. They're the ones who are telling everybody that we are abandoning them. And it's pretty clear when Kamala Harris, brings out Mark Cuban and we are a party of celebrities and billionaires. And I saw even on MSNBC, people were like, it's crazy. We had Taylor Swift endorsed. How do we like, that is not enough actually to win fucking
Agreed.
presidential elections. Like, wonderful that we got this
Glad the
Swiftie
New York
movement.
Times put that, splash that on the front page, like it was gonna change everything. Kill me now.
Yeah.
White women who she's basically, you know, the Pope for, went for Trump again.
Exactly.
Anyway.
And so we have invested so much time and energy into things that don't fucking matter, frankly. And instead of investing our time and energy, understand, why are Latino men voting for Donald Trump? What is the root cause of that? What is motivating them to vote for what people think is against their own interests? What economic interests are they not receiving? We first need to understand our voters and stop pretending like we do, and stop pretending to paint them with a broad brush, because everyone, including Donald Trump voters, are going to suffer under a Donald Trump presidency. And we should all, as progressives, want to be building a better future for all of them, even the people who fucking hate people that look like me.
I'm not sure.
That's okay.
Just cutting you off a little. I'm not sure if you saw, but there was a post that went viral that, you know, of course made me emotional, like about the idea of, you know, Trump supporters will be there to build back up your future when it's decimated by this mass deportation, these tariffs, the tax cuts for the rich. Like, that is the appeal that we have to have going forward, not demonizing the people. And it's very hard for me right now to say nice things about the American electorate, because with everything that you're saying, there still is just like oh my God, they voted. This was acceptable to people. Like, you have to fight that, because crying about that does nothing. There will always be a portion of the population that trends towards a right-wing, fascistic, nationalist politics. It's about engaging everybody else and turning everybody else out to think that there's a better future, to make sure that that is not appealing.
Absolutely. And, at the end of the day, they are being sold a vision, and it is a vision that appeals to them for various different reasons. And that's hurtful. That's problematic. It's all these things that we don't like, but it's because we are not giving them a better vision in their mind. And it's because we are not providing a vision where they feel like they are going to benefit from it in the future. And that's a problem. Why are Democrats, the party that used to be the party of a multiracial working class, not the party for Latinos and some Black men and some Muslim men, et cetera, et cetera? That is a Democratic Party problem. It's not an electorate problem. They are being fed, hours and hours of right-wing propaganda that works, right? And so, to your point of what's next, for us, more than anything, we should be looking towards, this is how I felt when we had these month of like, will Joe Biden drop out? What are we going to do? And it's just like, for years, we have talked about there is a new generation that we should be ushering into the Democratic Party and getting rid of an old generation. And I think that's what it started with. There is no leaders in the Democratic Party anymore. And so we need to uplift the folks who are actually doing the work, who are in these crucial states. We're not talking about just California Democrats, like the Republicans like to say. There's folks in New York, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Minnesota, Illinois, Delia Ramirez. These are the leaders of the future of the Democratic Party, if we ever want to have a Democratic Party that represents the needs of working class people. But this is a small group of people. 6 to 8 people is not enough in Congress to change the Democratic Party. And so we have to pick out the rest of them. We have to get rid of the Tom Swazis and the Josh Gottheimers and the Richie Torreses of this country that are actively opposing the needs of everyday people and obstructing our policies when we actually get there. And it starts by, for us, primarying them and kicking them out of the fucking Congress. And that's our job, but we have a very specific lane, right? For other folks, it's going to be building labor power and worker power across these districts to galvanize workers and everyday people towards a movement that improves their lives, and aligning with that movement the way that Sean Fain is calling for a general strike in a few years. Like, this is the work that all has to come together. It's not just going to be electoral. It has to happen on all levels. And that is going to be what we need to do moving forward. And so we're full steam ahead. This past cycle, obviously, AIPAC spent a shit ton of money against us because they hate us and we hate them. And we lost 2 of our best members because of it. But it meant that we couldn't run new races But this cycle, we're going to run a ton of races against a ton of really shitty Democrats. And so, we implore others who feel like they're in a Democratic district that don't feel like their issues and their needs are being heard to nominate your friends, your families, your neighbors, your community leaders to be members of Congress, and we'll try and help them get there.
Where can people do that if you want to plug?
Yeah, they can go to justicedemocrats.com/nominate, and you can pick your district, whatever district it is, and nominate whoever you think is a better fit than your current member of Congress.
Thank you so much. We'll put a link to that below, or wherever people are listening to or watching this. Usamah, you are the first person who I spoke with since the election who gave me a little bit of hope. So I really appreciate the conversation. Thank you.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Emma.
All right. Have a good one. With that, folks, we're gonna... You know what, actually, let's do this really quickly, because before we go into the fun half...
Can I just take a couple of notes on to that before...
Sure.
That kind of related. The International Union of Painters and Allied Trades leader had a good tweet that kind of echoed what Bernie said, but a little bit more succinctly. I'm pulling up here. This is Jimmy Williams Jr. Working people deserve a party that understands what's at stake and that puts their issues front and center when campaigning and governing. A potential Republican trifecta, along with Project 2025, will be catastrophic for unions, including my own. But if the Democrats want to win, they need to get serious about being a party for the working, by and for the working class. And I agree with that sentiment. And I think just as evidence to there, a guy, Dem Sok Shan on Elon Musk's X, went through some raw votes. And this is very interesting to me. And I think I would say a silver lining a little bit, which is that in New York's 14th district, AOC got more raw votes than Kamala Harris did. She got 123,000 raw votes. Kamala Harris got 122. In New York's 15th district, Kamala Harris got more votes than Richie Torres, the guy that they sent to Michigan to, reassure Zionists. So AOC, her politics turned people out. Richie Torres's did not. I think it's very clear that Richie Torres's politics were selected as the ones to prefer in this campaign. And that needs to be understood and jettisoned. And part of the thing, and then we can actually win this stuff. We can overperform standard Democrats. And I would just say to anybody, even if you're skeptical of the long-term prospects of the Democratic Party, getting experience running in elections is what's necessary. Whether you do that as an independent socialist, a Republican, a Justice Democrat, maybe a crypto socialist trying to present themselves as a normal Democrat in some state. We just need people with actual experience, because it's being left to corporate consultants and vultures that actually don't know how to win elections either.
Yep. And they've proven that time and time again. Trump probably would have won in 2020 if it wasn't for COVID.
I remember thinking that at the time, that we kind of dodged it, then hoping that, hopefully he'll die before he gets a chance to run again.
I was like, Biden's going to lose to Trump. The whole time I thought that was the case, until really the pandemic and the final months. And then I got a bunch of confidence and okay, maybe they figured out how to run against Trump. No, they didn't. Turns out it was the set of circumstances in that particular year. And
we had Branko Marcic on last night, and he had the same sort of thing. It's like, they wouldn't be doing this if they were, and this is kind of your thinking too, they wouldn't be doing this if they weren't seeing something that showed them it. But I think the problem is it was idealistic in the way they wanted to govern, and hubristic in that they thought they could beat Trump, which I will contend he was once again a weak candidate, and it's a big crime that he's been allowed to win 2 elections in this country.
What I wanted folks to leave folks with is, in the same way that Sam, before our race, played that John Oliver thing about how we should vote for Harris to keep Trump out of office. This AOC live stream about where we go from here, I wanted to just play this portion before we head into the fun half for everybody, because we're all grappling with this. And she will be one of the leaders of the progressive movement going forward, hopefully. And she was live for around an hour, and this is what she basically had to say about what where we go from here. It's around 5 minutes. I just wanted to play a little bit of it for folks.
As well. Now, what this means is that I think it's important, and I'm going to just give it to you all very straight. This is going to be a very, 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 very challenging, difficult time. We can use the next several months to prepare as best as we can. Trump would be inaugurated around January 20th or so. And we can use this time to prepare as best as we can for what is going to be a very challenging and very difficult time for millions of people in this country. A lot of people have asked me that, is Trump actually going to do the things that he said he's going to do? I think, listen, no one has a crystal ball, but I think that it is, and what we said on the campaign trail, when he says he's going to do something, believe him. I believe just today, his press secretary confirmed his commitment to mass deportations beginning, the day or day after of his presidency. Talking about RFK trying to remove fluoridated water from the United States, which, there are public health. I'm not here to get into debates with anybody or, start fires in the group chat or whatever. But, when you look at public health comprehensive studies of, cities and towns that have done that, the amount of kids that really suffer health outcomes and need to, receive, I believe, like antibiotic injections and all this other crazy stuff is through the roof. We're talking about vaccines that may be taken off the market entirely. And, even Mitch McConnell, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, still suffers from complications of, I believe, about a polio that he had when he was a child. This is real. This is real. And I'm not here to sugarcoat what we all are about to collectively experience. But I think that what we can do to prepare is build community. We do not have a choice. We don't have a choice. Our choice is to build. Our choice is to continue to fight. Our choice is to win. Our choice is to have each other. We are about to enter a political period that will have consequences for the rest of our lives. We cannot give up. We now find ourselves in a time in history that has precedent, and we find ourselves, I believe, in a time where there are, let's say, peers in history of mass movements of people that mobilize to protect one another in times of fascism and authoritarianism. And this is the era that we are poised to enter. Donald Trump has talked about turning the military on U.S. citizens that he deems his domestic political enemies. Authoritarians and people that he affiliates closely with and strongmen abroad in regimes like that, it is not uncommon to jail political dissidents or legislative opponents. This is the world that we very realistically may be entering. And the way that we do everything that we can to prevent this is by building a very strong social fabric and social infrastructure. Now,
that was really the sentiments that it was a an hour long, but that was the stuff that I picked up on in terms of just like, we do have to begin to build from the ground up because we've been left with ruins. And that is the path forward, is building, getting involved, building community in a society that's extremely individualistic and anti-communitarian. It's quite difficult, but this is how we move forward. Build levers of power that include unions, that include broad-based organizations that are multiracial and committed to economic justice, and we survive. That's what we do.
Yeah, and just two notes. RFK, the section there, the RFK health stuff about fluoride is a placeholder for the GOP because they don't have, say, what their Obamacare replacement is. But of course, you need to have an affirmative agenda, so they fabricated an insane one, and people rallied around it. That's why it's important to have a positive agenda. And I also say, like, we've had our disagreements with AOC and Bernie, particularly. We grant that they're some of the better on Palestine, but also we didn't like their timeline on certain things. But we also had a disagreement about the Joe Biden leaving the race, Kamala Harris thing. And what they were noticing, even though we disagree with like their approach to support Biden in that moment because people had moved on from him. But what they were noticing was the fundamental problem that we're dealing with in the Democratic Party, which is a loss of working class support.
Well, they were worried about the Blitz primary, which I agree would have been a disaster. And I don't know. I mean, I still disagree with that strategy. They should have leveraged this stuff with Kamala instead of saying Biden stay in.
To me, the strategy was a problem because it just wasn't connected to the movements. Like if DSA was saying, hey, Joe is the guy with unions, then to me, the process is the part that bugs me. It's because I had no idea what they were judging that based on, right? And I think they tried their best to put their marker down for this problem, which is the glaring problem of the Democratic Party. And at that point, it's just like nobody knew what they were doing from like a DSA standpoint or from like an outside movement standpoint, because what people were seeing was a guy who was not competent to actually run for president anymore.
Yeah.
But the issue, like fundamentally what I'm trying to say is like, despite that disagreement, the analysis about the problem is the same, despite like that sort of momentary departure in like what should be done in the moment. The problem is still who is being left behind by the campaign priorities of the elite Democratic Party.
Yep, that's exactly right. And I had another point, but I'm completely blanking on it. Anyway, we'll see. The getting word, I mean, this House, the Republicans will probably take the House by 1 or 2 seats, but it's actually razor thin. Let's, Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Had a big day yesterday on Left Reckoning. We did a members only sort of Zoom chat for the first time, so got to talk with people a little bit just directly. And then we did a show with Stephen Semler, who has a bunch of great graphs about the actual hardship going on in this country.
We showed one of those earlier.
Exactly, yeah. And Semler is just a great researcher there. And in the post game, we had Bronco Marchich on to debrief a little bit too. And then I went into a 2009 speech by Barack Obama, where he says, I understand some of you would rather let the banks fail, but we got to save the banks because that's what history shows. And I understand some of you think you should get a bailout for your mortgage, and you should get a bailout for your business. And you're wrong, because the banks will do way more better with it. And we are living in that world, I contend. That I think even more than Gaza policy and Biden generally, I think it's the working class and anybody who's not, frankly, under $100,000 has been completely shafted for 15 years now based on that decision. And it also cultivated people like Peter Thiel and Elon Musk. That policy created the Silicon Valley that just shifted to the right, just went Trump. Mark Zuckerberg, yeah, Trump surviving that assassination attempt was one of the coolest things I've ever seen. Also protect us from China, which is what all those guys are actually saying. And the Democrats made those guys with Obama's with Obama's recovery policy. And sure, it was better than just the libertarian, we're just going to let everything fail and everyone die. Homeowners should have been backed up. The relief should have went to the American people. It wasn't. And now the Democrats are reaping what they sowed.
That is that legacy as well. On ESPN today, Bradley and I will give our picks against the spread. Fucking stupid. What's up, guys?
Hey.
How you doing?
Better than yesterday.
Anything happened this week? What have we missed?
I was very wrong about the race, and also it's less about being wrong and more just about what we're facing here. But anyway,
I was wrong too. You're not alone. I guess I should have taken my own message. Like I became completely disengaged after she was announced by where the campaign went, and I completely was like, I'm not going to even bother watching right now. And then I just got back into it right before, a couple of weeks before the election, and I believed like what was out there in terms of their ground game, and I was like, oh, I guess I didn't agree with what they were doing, but this is what they're saying. And I haven't been paying attention the past couple of months, so maybe they're right. And they weren't.
Well,
and I believed it.
All those
like
traditional campaign metrics that you learn in political science about what you're supposed to look out for. Like she was ahead on all of that stuff. Turns out it didn't matter. Turns out we've got to break this shit apart and build it up from the ground up. None of that mattered. Anyway, what's up, Brandon?
That is sort of, I was, I will say, like, I was, sort of just like, I was very tired yesterday after the Majority Report show. Let's put it that way. We went along. I know you guys probably already talked about this yesterday. And so by the time I got home, and then I had to wake up early and get the kids to school still. So I was exhausted yesterday. But like now today, as I'm finally getting a chance to look at everything. Listen, obviously not ideal that he won, but he won. And so we should go with the best case scenario. This is our chance to really shake things up with our party in the same way that Donald Trump shook things up with the Republicans. I mean, whether the Democrats are receptive to that and whether they win out or yeah, there we go. I mean, we know they won't.
Jamie Harrison, Jamie Harrison
won't be seeking re-election, out, though, or won't. He's getting booted from the DNC.
He won't, but he's also saying Bernie Sanders is wrong. It's straight BS. Biden was the most pro-worker president of my lifetime, which people keep saying that, and it's a funny thing to say because every president of my lifetime has been absolutely hostile to workers, as far as I'm concerned.
Well, that's why it's kind of true. But it doesn't fucking matter. He didn't communicate. First of all, Biden couldn't communicate, which is a big problem. And two, it wasn't communicated to people. So stop whining.
But again, I'm sorry, it wasn't sufficient. Even if it was communicated perfectly, they turned their back on working people 100%. They let the child tax credit expire and said it was to balance the goddamn budget. We balanced the budget on poor kids.
Well, I mean, that was mentioned in cinema too. I mean, I can't
expend some political capital on it.
Yeah.
They've done a horrible job with messaging on top of policy, but messaging is clearly what reigns supreme in an electoral race. I mean, Trump won on messaging. He didn't do anything for anybody. He made it clear in how he was campaigning that prices are too high and I'm going to lower them for you.
But the message is when people go to the fucking grocery store, it's nothing coming from the campaigns. It's when they go to look at apartments in their community. That's the message. That's the political message. Right. It's not, I'm seeing people saying we need to outreach to YouTubers. And look, I would love, say, the Obama, hey, get us involved, guys. Give us some of that spending. I'm sorry. That's not the fucking problem. It's not the problem. The problem is the message that people are getting when they try to buy life essentials.
Yeah, you can't argue with people about their lived experience right now, even if you feel like it's unreflective of where the economy really is, which I feel a lot of Biden, Biden administration surrogates like to point to this, this abstract economy, the stock market. Oh, the stock market's booming because AI is driving like the tech sector up, through the stratosphere. And so why can't people be okay with paying $20 for a bag of coffee at the local like natural market? But that's just not how people experience life. I would say, I was wrong in my prediction. I didn't give it much thought because I was kind of going on a vibes-based predictive method. But I feel like in doing that, not really focusing on any of the polls, I was able to correctly diagnose why I feel like the Democrats did poorly. I just wasn't able to diagnose that they would lose based on that. Primarily, I think because I was looking at the turnout from 2020 and imagining that the big boon that they had seen was at least partially driven by changing demographics and not as driven by just like dissatisfaction with COVID.
Yep.
But in hindsight, I think, I don't know if Biden would have lost to Trump in 2020 sans COVID, but I think it would have been frighteningly close had that been the case.
It was already frighteningly close because of the way he only won. I have this written down somewhere, but the margins in the swing states were extremely thin, and she lost enough of those folks for it to matter, to make a difference.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that I would have to include my calculus next time. Not that there'll be another pandemic before the next election or during the next election. Who knows, right? But
well, maybe that's the way Democratic consultants will take from this.
They'll have to release another. Release another infected bat.
This will be, and this is what we need to make happen. And I'm not saying we have our own Trump, but in the way that in 2012 the Republicans did like a whole breakdown of why they needed to readjust their message. Remember, they did that whole document about we need to outreach to Latino voters because we lost all of them. And then Trump came in and he said Mexicans are rapists and things like that. And it didn't really matter because he won. And now Trump is winning Latino men by double-digit points, according to exit polling. And so, like, the Democrats need to then do the same thing that happened in 2012, but come up with a conclusion that's much more pro-worker. We need to maybe nominate someone from the fucking heartland of this country. Yeah.
I would say they also need to feel comfortable. I know some people are going to shy away from this, but like actually naming a villain and like shaming that villain. And it doesn't need to be people that the Republicans have already villainized. Because even
it's so
when you
dangerous to let them be the only ones villainizing people because we know who they villainize. Sorry, Brandon, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'm, I know people the moment they hear like pointing the finger, especially when like you're talking to liberals and who have a very suburban pathology, they kind of instinctually clutch their pearls. But no one's talking about dehumanizing people or making them some sort of pariah. But the fact that Kamala Harris couldn't go on stage at that undecided voters forum, not that I think a lot of people would have been driven by that particular appearance specifically, but as part of her campaign, like pattern of her campaign, she couldn't go on stage and point and say like the prices of goods are going too high because corporations. This is what Bernie would have said. He would have said like, for too long, fat cats have been. I think that was more like that was more of an Alex Jones. I'm not gonna do a Bernie impression, but he would have spoken to the reality that like bosses are getting rich while workers are struggling to put food on their tables, and that would have been like a central, coherent message. The Democrats go out there and they go like, we're not saying all corporations are bad. We're not saying that all bosses are bad, but there are some fraction of people, fraction of people who just aren't playing fair, and we have to somehow find those people.
Hall monitors.
Yeah, right. Like, and that's
and
just
here to talk more about that, Mark Cuban.
Yeah,
or opportunities.
Cheney, or I don't know, like who else is on Dragon's Den or Shark Tank? Did they wheel out like Paul?
And one good thing that opportunity economy stuff, I'm sorry, that automatically organizes people as rivalrous to everyone else, as opposed to solidaristic because of like the gig work thing. Oops, sorry. Like gig work turns everyone against each other because they're like little entrepreneurs, as opposed to say we're all workers together, and that's automatically organizing people toward the right wing. When you're in that mindset, you're automatic. And so like when Harris runs it on, we're doing the Mark Cuban opportunity economy again. That's more rivalrous. It's not about us as workers.
Exactly.
Like that is going to lose to the Republicans because the Republicans are the genuine article of I'm in it for fucking me and I'm gonna get mine. And when both parties are mentioning that, they're gonna go with the genuine article.
No, and I was saying the exact same thing on Twitter. Like the Democratic Party's vague stances on social liberation not only don't make sense without being adhered to like collective economic liberation, but they work antithetical to that. Like I always use the example of like affirmative action that like was very popular in the Democratic Party of like the Barack Obama days of like, we're not trying to help people get ahead in a race. We're just trying to make sure that the race is all being run fair and equally, and we all have an equal chance of winning. But we live in a society where if you don't have a job, if you can't afford to like, pay for certain goods and services, you will just die. No one wants to run a fair race in that society. And so if you're not trying to frame the conversation of society so to be more symbiotic, more holistic, like the health of the, that your neighbor is not your opponent in a race, but part of a joint organism that you both rely on being healthy. Because hey, if your neighbor can't afford to pay his rent, that causes the entire neighborhood to degrade in terms of like quality of life, in terms of like the funding for schools, things like that. Reframing that message is how you get people to view the world as something different. Exactly. Because like, yeah, if you frame it as like, well, if I go for a job interview and I need that job interview to pay for health insurance, and I need that job interview to pay for an apartment, I need that job interview to pay for kids, and all someone is saying that like, yeah, we're going to make sure that you have the opportunity to compete fairly with as many people as possible. No one wants to hear that. The materialist message of the Republican Party is one that at least addresses what some people feel like could be a concern, which is that we're just going to take people out of the job market. You're a young man who can't get a good job. We're going to take women out of the job market. We're going to make sure that racism comes back so you have a better chance of getting a job over a woman, over a Black person, over illegal and over an undocumented worker. That's their message for how to combat the material deprivation people are feeling, which doesn't work, obviously, but the Democrats have no counter to that. They just go like, well, you should be glad to compete fairly with people for your ability to live. Like, no, that's the Hunger Games. That's like,
speaking of the Hunger Games, there was a funny tweet that's saying like, must be exactly how Katniss felt when she had to go back for the second time in the Hunger Games. Although that's pretty dorky in comparison. Sorry to live out, but I did just rewatch those movies. They're pretty good.
Me too.
Yeah,
I just rewatched that. I saw that mocking. I saw that Songbirds and Snakes movie. I'm going off track. The movie was terrible.
I'm not watching the. I'm not watching the non-trilogy ones. But I mean, they did. So Walls mentioned neighborliness like a lot, and Harris did talk about it a little. But your point is so salient. It was, I don't look at my neighbor and see an enemy. I don't look at the person living next to me as an enemy. I see them as my neighbor. And it was about bigotry and racism, where the sense of community that comes from like economic solidarity was not a part of that campaign.
Yeah, it's not all of us fighting our bosses to get more money so we can make our neighbor better. It's, can I sell my neighbor an NFT?
Yeah.
Or are they going to compete for the job and undercut me slightly on wages? Like, I'm sorry, there's a reason that when we beat fascism or the authoritarian trend of the 1930s, it was through a New Deal style politics that says like, yeah, there are bastards out there that are actually vampiric sort of financial vultures, and I'm against them.
Yeah.
It's not, actually we can make this sort of vampiric system work for everybody. And here's a grant in cities that often offer grants to, first time home buyers or whatever. But anyway, here's this technical thing, read the fine print and, maybe you qualify. It just doesn't work.
You can be a vampire too. Just,
right.
Just open up your neck and we will.
Anyway, what's happening on your guys' shows though? Because we should head into the fun half.
I realize
honestly,
I'm having fun already. I'm always having fun.
Who knows? Well, on Leftist Mafia, we will be live tonight. First Leftist Mafia show since the election. I'm sure that'll be interesting. If you want to hear from David Dole and Mike Figueredo and Lance from the Surfs and Rebecca Azor and myself and possibly a guest, I'm not sure. There you go. YouTube.com/Matt Binder.
All right.
Yeah. On the Discourse, we had a pre-election morning stream that will be up on the Patreon. where I will also be, my podcast will be meeting to record an episode, do a sort of a post-mortem, which I would recommend listening to because my co-host, The Dare, he was one of the only people I know who was correctly predicting the election the entire time by looking at polls. But I guess that's what being like a math guy will do. So if you want to listen back to old episodes too, to hear a genealogy of thought there of why he thought that the election was going to turn out the way it did, definitely look into that. And the next week I will be streaming on our Twitch platform, probably Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. We're going to be going hard next week. We're going to do another live postmortem on the Twitch. So follow me on Saudi and Diddy owned social media app, Twitter at Pretty Bad Lefty. You can also follow me on Blue Sky, I guess, at the exact same handle. I know people are leaving Twitter, which always causes me an instinctual shock because I'm already silenced by Saudi and Diddy owned Twitter. So, it is what it is.
All right.
I lost a bunch of followers. I don't usually pay attention to this stuff, but like it was so stark, like such a large amount right after the election ended. I was like, are these like people leaving
Rage quitting?
Because
They're rage quitting for sure. People rage quitting.
Yeah,
Twitter.
I was like, is
And
it
bots.
that, or maybe I was like, are the bots? Yeah, or bots deactivating after their job? They've done their job and now they're gone. I mean, I was really wondering. Usually,
are you talking Twitter or YouTube, Bender?
Twitter.
Oh, interesting. I mean, I actually tweeted out just randomly that I realized Blue Sky had 1.2 thousand followers, and I haven't been on that website in a long time. And yeah, it does seem like there's a lot of movement going toward it now.
All right, guys.
The problem is we can talk about the second half. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. Let's go to the second half is probably a more apt way to refer to it. I don't think we don't have enough time. We took a lot of calls yesterday. We'll take more calls tomorrow. So no calls today, guys. No need for the number. We'll see you in the fun half.
Okay, Emma, please.
Well, I feel that my voice is sorely lacking on the majority report.
Wait, look, Sam is unpopular.
I do deserve a vacation at Disney World. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to welcome Emma to the show.
It is Thursday.
I think you need to take over for Sam.
Yes, please.
No. I'm gonna pause you right there.
Wait, what?
You can't encourage Emma to live like this. And I'll tell you why. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
What?
Tour, sushi, and poker.
Tim's upset.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. She was offered a tour, sushi, and
that's what we call it in the biz.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Right.
Tour, sushi, and poker.
We're gonna get demonetized.
I just think that what you did to Tim Pool was mean.
Free speech.
That's not what we're about here. Look at how sad he's become now. We shouldn't even talk about it because I think you're responsible.
I probably am in a certain way, but let's get to the meltdown here.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Oh my God.
Tour,
wow.
Sushi.
I'm sorry, I'm losing my fucking mind.
She was offered a tour, sushi, and poker with the boys.
Logic.
Tour, sushi, and poker with the boys. Boy. Tour.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a kid.
Tour.
I think I'm like a little kid. I think I'm like a little kid.
Had this debate 7,000